Aurora Griffith clutched her mother's worn letter in trembling hands as the sound of boots clomped up the wooden staircase toward her bedroom. San Bernardino, 1875, a growing California town she'd called home for 23 years, had become her prison rather than her sanctuary. The letter, penned in her mother's elegant script before consumption claimed her 5 years ago, had one line that Aurora clung to. Never surrender your heart to duty alone, for a life without love is merely existence. The bedroom door flew open. Her father, Edmund Griffith, stood there with a thunderous expression, his once kindly face now twisted by grief, avarice, and the influence of her stepmother, Harriet. Behind him loomed Dr. Morris, the town physician, whose cold, analytical gaze made Aurora feel like a specimen under glass. "This has gone on long enough, Aurora," her father declared, his voice echoing against the floral-papered walls. "3 suitable offers of marriage refused, the latest from Jonathan Pierce, the wealthiest landowner in the county. Harriet and I have discussed it with Dr. Morris, and he agrees. Your persistent melancholy and refusal to secure your future shows a disturbed mind." Aurora rose from her seat by the window, her spine straight despite her racing heart. "I am not disturbed, Father. I simply will not marry a man I cannot love, Doctor." Morris stepped forward, his medical bag clutched in his bony fingers. "Miss Griffith, such romantic notions are symptomatic of female hysteria. The asylum in Sacramento has excellent treatments for women suffering from such delusions." "Asylum," Aurora whispered, the blood draining from her face. Her father wouldn't meet her eyes. "The doctor will return tomorrow with the necessary papers. The carriage will take you to Sacramento on Thursday. It's for your own good, daughter." When they left, locking the door behind them, Aurora sank to the floor. The asylum. She'd heard whispers about women who entered such places, how they rarely emerged the same, if they emerged at all. Treatments of ice baths, isolation, and restraints awaited those deemed hysterical or disobedient. Night fell across San Bernardino as Aurora formulated her plan. She could not stay, yet had nowhere to go. Her modest inheritance from her mother remained in her father's control until marriage. Her few friends in town would not defy Edmund Griffith, whose banking business financed half the establishments in the county. As moonlight spilled through her window, Aurora carefully packed a small valise. 1 dress, her mother's locket, the letter, and the $50 she'd secretly saved from selling her watercolor paintings at the general store. It wouldn't get her far, but it might buy her time. The ranch on the town's outskirts belonged to the O'Connor family. Their son, Vincent, had returned from 4 years driving cattle between Texas and California. Though Aurora had only exchanged pleasantries with him at church socials, she remembered his kind eyes and the way he'd defended a Mexican farmhand from harassment in the town square last month. If anyone might help her without alerting her father, it would be Vince O'Connor. Aurora carefully pried loose the floorboard where she'd hidden a rope ladder fashioned from bedsheets. With trembling hands, she secured it to her heavy oak dresser and tossed it out the second-story window. The cool night air carried the scent of jasmine as she descended, her heart pounding with each step. Freedom, or at least escape, lay just yards away in the form of her family's aging mare, Daisy, who waited in the paddock. Across town, Vincent O'Connor cleaned his revolver by lantern light in the modest cabin he'd built separate from his parents' main house. At 28, he'd seen enough of the frontier to know he preferred the familiar hills of San Bernardino to the wild plains of Texas or the mountains of Colorado. Still, restlessness plagued him. His father's cattle ranch provided steady work, but something was missing. A knock at his door startled him. Visitors rarely came this late. Cautiously, he approached, gun still in hand. "Who's there?" he called. "Please," came a woman's voice, soft and desperate. "I need help." Vincent opened the door to find Aurora Griffith standing before him, a small valise clutched in her hands and her chestnut hair falling loose from its pins. He'd noticed her at church and town gatherings, always proper, always accompanied by her stern father or haughty stepmother. Tonight she looked terrified. "Miss Griffith, what in heaven's name? They're sending me to an asylum," she interrupted, her voice breaking. "My father, my stepmother, because I won't marry the men they choose. The doctor comes tomorrow with papers. Please, Mr. O'Connor." "I have nowhere else to go." Vincent ushered her inside, setting his gun on the table. "Slow down. An asylum for refusing marriage," Aurora nodded, sinking onto a wooden chair. "They claim I'm suffering from female hysteria and delusions, but I'm not mad, Mr. O'Connor. I only wish to choose my own path." Vincent handed her a cup of water, studying her face in the lantern light. Her eyes, though frightened, showed clear intelligence and determination. No madness resided there. "Call me Vince," he said. "Now tell me everything." As Aurora explained her situation, Vincent's jaw tightened. He'd heard stories about asylums, more prisons than hospitals, where women were committed for everything from reading too many novels to speaking their minds at public gatherings. The thought of Aurora confined to such a place stirred something protective within him. "You can stay here tonight," he said finally. "My mother has some spare clothing that might fit you, but we need a plan. Your father isn't a man to cross lightly in these parts." "I have $50, Aurora offered. "Enough for train fare east, perhaps." Vincent shook his head. "They'd look for a woman traveling alone, and $50 won't get you established anywhere safe." He paced the small cabin, thinking. "I have a cousin in Colorado. Runs a boarding house near Denver. You could stay there while deciding your next steps." "Why would you help me?" Aurora asked, her voice small. "You barely know me." Vincent paused, meeting her gaze directly, because no one should be locked away for wanting to choose their own life. "My sister." He swallowed hard. "My sister married a man our father chose. He beat her until she lost their baby. She died a year later of a broken heart, though the doctor called it fever. I swore I'd never stand by watching someone forced into a life they didn't want." Aurora's eyes filled with tears. "I'm so sorry about your sister." "It was years ago," Vincent said, though the pain in his voice suggested otherwise. "Get some rest. I'll sleep in the barn and figure out our next steps come morning." Dawn brought with it the sound of hoofbeats approaching the cabin. Vincent, already awake and vigilant, peered through the window to see his father riding toward him. He quickly went to where Aurora slept on his cot. "Miss Griffith," he whispered, gently shaking her shoulder. "Wake up. My father's coming. Stay quiet." Aurora bolted upright, fear immediately returning to her eyes. "Does he know I'm here?" "No, but he can't find you. Hide in the root cellar." Vincent pulled back a rug, revealing a small trapdoor. "It's not comfortable, but it's safe." Aurora climbed down into the small, cool space just as a knock sounded at the door. Vincent closed the trapdoor, replaced the rug, and went to greet his father. Patrick O'Connor, a barrel-chested man with a silver-streaked beard, stood on the porch looking troubled. "Morning, son." Town's in an uproar. Edmund Griffith's daughter ran off last night. They formed a search party. Vincent feigned surprise. "Aurora Griffith, the banker's daughter, why would she run?" Patrick shook his head. "Edmund claims she's unwell in the mind, says she needs medical attention. He's offering $100 to whoever finds her." "That's a lot of money for a runaway girl," Vincent remarked carefully. "Aye, but there's more to it, I'd wager. Rebecca at the general store says Edmund arranged a marriage for the girl with old Pierce, and she wasn't having it. Patrick spat onto the ground. Reminds me too much of what happened with your sister, God rest her soul. Vincent's surprise was genuine now. You didn't approve of Kathleen's marriage either, course not. Thomas Fleming was a mean drunk with a cruel streak. But your mother was dying and Fleming had money for doctors. Patrick's eyes clouded with regret. Biggest mistake of my life pushing that match. Wouldn't wish that fate on any woman. A new understanding passed between father and son. Vincent nodded slowly. I need to check the south pasture today. Thought I saw a break in the fence last night. Patrick studied his son's face. The south pasture, eh? Might want to check that abandoned line shack out there too. Nobody's used it in years. Would be a good hiding spot for someone who didn't want to be found. He mounted his horse. I'll tell your mother you'll be busy today. Might not make it home for supper. Vincent watched his father ride away, understanding the unspoken message. When he was certain the coast was clear, he opened the trapdoor. It's safe now. Aurora climbed out, brushing dirt from her skirts. Your father suspects, doesn't he? He gave us his blessing in his way. Vincent began gathering supplies. There's an old line shack about 10 miles south. We'll head there until I can arrange passage to Colorado. They departed an hour later. Aurora wearing a pair of old trousers and a shirt from Vincent's younger days, her hair tucked under a worn hat. The disguise wouldn't fool anyone looking closely, but it might prevent immediate recognition from a distance. They rode double on Vincent's sturdy bay gelding, taking back trails and dry creek beds to avoid the main roads. The line shack proved to be a single-room structure with a stone fireplace, a narrow cot, and little else. Vincent worked quickly to clear dust and cobwebs while Aurora gathered kindling. I'll hunt us some dinner, Vincent said, checking his rifle. The shack is well hidden, but stay inside just in case. Alone in the shack, Aurora found herself contemplating her situation. Had she been reckless fleeing like this? Her father would be furious, his reputation damaged by her disappearance. Yet the alternative, the asylum, was unthinkable. Vincent returned with a pair of rabbits as twilight descended. Aurora, raised in town with servants to handle such tasks, watched with fascination as he skillfully cleaned and prepared the meat. Have you always lived on ranches? She asked. Vincent smiled, his hands working steadily. Born in a wagon crossing the Sierra Nevada. My parents were heading to the gold fields, but they found cattle more reliable than prospecting. And you, did you ever search for gold? Spent a season panning streams near Sacramento. Found enough to buy my first horse, but not much more. Vincent set the meat to cook over the fire. I prefer honest work where the rewards are earned through effort, not luck. As night deepened, they shared the simple meal and their stories. Aurora spoke of her mother's death, her father's remarriage to the socially ambitious Harriet, and the succession of increasingly unpleasant suitors paraded before her. Jonathan Pierce is 62, she said with a shudder. He's buried 2 wives already. But he owns half the land in the county, and Harriet was positively gleeful at the prospect of the match. Vincent's face darkened. Pierce has a reputation among the ranch hands. His field workers leave more often than they stay. Did you ever consider marriage? Aurora asked, changing the subject. Vincent poked at the fire. Came close once. Maria Ramirez. Her father worked our ranch when I was 22. We planned to marry, but her family moved north when the drought hit 6 years ago. He shrugged. Exchanged letters for a while. Last one said she'd married a shopkeeper in Oregon. I'm sorry. Life out here rarely follows the plans we make. Vincent stood, stretching his tall frame. You take the cot. I'll keep watch. That's hardly necessary. Your father has a search party looking for you, and there's $100 reward. Men have killed for less. I'll sleep by the door." Aurora didn't argue further. Despite the circumstances, she felt strangely at peace. For the first time in years, she'd spoken freely, without worrying about propriety or her stepmother's judgmental glare. As she drifted to sleep, she realized Vincent O'Connor was unlike any man she'd met: direct, honest, and respectful of her choices, even the dangerous ones. Morning came with a surprise visitor. Vincent was checking the perimeter when he spotted a rider approaching his father. Patrick dismounted, expression grave. "They searched our property yesterday after you left. Edmund Griffith himself, the sheriff, and that doctor with the cold eyes." "They find anything?" "Nothing, but they're expanding the search. Edmund's doubled the reward." Patrick handed Vincent a sack. "Provisions and this." He produced a small leather pouch that clinked with coins. $200, saved it for you anyway." Vincent was stunned. "Pa, I can't." "You can and you will. There's a cattle drive leaving from Riverside tomorrow, heading to Denver. Man called Jackson's leading it. I told him you might join them. He owes me a favor from 68. Patrick glanced at the shack. "Is she worth this risk, son?" Vincent considered the question. "I barely know her," he admitted, "but I know what's right, and locking a woman away for wanting to choose her own husband isn't right." Patrick nodded. "Your mother said something similar. Said she'd have run too if her parents had tried marrying her to someone like Pierce." He mounted his horse. "Be careful. That Dr. Morris, there's something wrong about him. The way he talked about treatments for the girl made my skin crawl." After his father departed, Vincent returned to find Aurora awake and dressed. "Was that your father?" she asked anxiously. "Yes. The search is intensifying." Vincent explained the situation and the potential escape route. "The cattle drive would get you to Denver safely. Nobody questions a cowhand's business." Aurora's expression fell slightly. "You're not coming?" Vincent hesitated. The question caught him off guard. "I assumed you'd want to make your own way once you reached Denver." "Of course," Aurora said quickly, embarrassment coloring her cheeks. "That makes perfect sense. I'm grateful for your help getting me there." Vincent studied her face, recognizing the brave front she was putting on. In just a day, he'd come to admire her courage. The thought of sending her alone to Denver troubled him more than he wanted to admit. "Actually," he said slowly, "I think I should see this through. A woman traveling alone, even disguised, could face dangers. And my father's right, this Dr. Morris seems determined." Relief washed over Aurora's face, quickly masked by pragmatism. "If you're certain." "I wouldn't want to further disrupt your life." "My life could use some disruption," Vincent replied with a small smile. "We'll leave at dusk for Riverside. It's 15 miles south. We should arrive by morning if we ride carefully." The journey to Riverside was tense. Twice they had to hide from riders on the main road, and once they spotted a campfire that Vincent suspected belonged to bounty hunters drawn by the reward. They traveled through the night, Aurora fighting exhaustion as she clung to Vincent's back on the horse. Dawn revealed Riverside, a bustling town serving as a hub for cattle shipments. Vincent found the camp of Jackson's cattle drive on the outskirts, 20 men preparing to move 200 head of cattle northward. Frank Jackson, a weathered man in his 50s, greeted Vincent with wary recognition. "Patrick's boy, eh? Said you might show up. Didn't mention a companion." Vincent introduced Aurora as his cousin Alan, explaining he was seeking work in Denver. Jackson wasn't fooled but didn't press the issue. "Can you both ride? Handle a gun?" When they nodded, Jackson continued. "2 more hands are welcome, considering 3 of mine got arrested for brawling last night. We leave in 2 hours. $20 each when we reach Denver, plus meals." They joined the cattle drive as it departed Riverside, Aurora keeping her hat low and her voice gruff when required to speak. The first day passed in exhausting work, pushing reluctant cattle along dusty trails. By nightfall, Aurora's hands were blistered and every muscle ached, but she didn't complain. Around the campfire, Vincent found himself watching her with growing admiration. Despite her sheltered upbringing, she adapted quickly, observing the cowboys and mimicking their movements. When one of the hands challenged Alan to a hand of poker, she played skillfully, winning $3 and the grudging respect of the men. "Where'd you learn to play cards like that?" Vincent asked later, when they had a moment alone away from the campfire. Aurora smiled mischievously. "My mother taught me before she died, said a lady should know how to separate a gentleman from his money in at least 3 different ways." Vincent laughed. "She sounds remarkable." She was. Father was different when she was alive, kinder, after she died. Aurora's smile faded. Harriet changed him, or perhaps revealed what was always there. Their conversation was interrupted by shouts from the camp. One of the cowboys came running, rifle in hand. Riders approaching, 6 of them moving fast. Vincent pulled Aurora into the shadows. "Stay here. If there's trouble, take my horse and ride north. Don't stop until you reach the next town." Before she could protest, he moved toward Jackson and the others who had formed a defensive line. The approaching riders slowed as they neared the camp, and Vincent's stomach turned when he recognized Sheriff Bridges from San Bernardino among them. "Evening, gentlemen," the sheriff called. "Sorry to disturb your dinner. We're looking for 2 people who might have joined your drive." Vincent O'Connor and Aurora Griffith. Jackson stepped forward. "I've got 20 men here, Sheriff. None named O'Connor and certainly no woman. Edmund Griffith's offering $300 now for his daughter's return," the sheriff continued. "She's unwell, needs medical attention." The boys wanted for abduction. Vincent felt a cold rage building. Abduction? Aurora had come to him for help, begging for escape from a fate worse than death. One of the sheriff's men dismounted, walking toward the campfire. "Mind if we look around? Won't take but a minute." "Actually, I do mind," Jackson said firmly. "My men are tired, the cattle are settled, and we move out at dawn. Unless you've got a warrant, Sheriff, I suggest you continue your search elsewhere." The standoff lasted several tense moments. Vincent's hand hovered near his gun, knowing that if shooting started, their chances were poor. Finally, the sheriff spat on the ground. "We'll be watching the trails north," he warned. $300 is a lot of motivation for men to keep their eyes open. As the riders departed, Vincent returned to where he'd left Aurora, finding her white-faced but composed, his horse's reins already in her hand. "You heard?" he asked unnecessarily. She nodded. "Abduction. My father must be beside himself with fury. He's never handled public embarrassment well." Jackson approached them, his expression unreadable. "So, O'Connor, want to tell me what kind of trouble you've brought to my drive?" Vincent explained the situation honestly, expecting to be told to leave. To his surprise, Jackson merely nodded when he finished. "Had a sister committed to one of those asylums back in '63, the cattle boss said, looking at Aurora. "For reading novels and arguing with her husband. Visited her once before she died. Wasn't my sister anymore, just an empty shell." He spat tobacco juice into the dust. "You can stay with the drive, but we need to change your route. Sheriff's men will be watching the main trails." The next morning, Jackson divided his men. 16 would continue with most of the cattle along the planned route, while Jackson, Vincent, Aurora, and 2 trusted hands brothers named Illy and Samuel Carter would take a smaller group of cattle through a less traveled mountain pass. "It's slower and rougher," Jackson warned, "but fewer eyes that way." The new route tested them all. Steep trails, loose rocks, and the constant threat of predators taking calves kept them vigilant and exhausted. Aurora proved her mettle daily, working alongside the men without complaint, despite blisters that turned to calluses and sunburn that bronzed her fair skin. At night, when the others slept, Vincent and Aurora often talked in low voices, sharing stories and dreams. He told her about his years on cattle drives, the characters he'd met, the places he'd seen. She spoke of books she'd read, paintings she'd admired in San Francisco galleries during her mother's time, and her secret wish to one day see the great cities of the East. "Have you ever seen snow?" she asked one clear night, staring at the stars overhead. Vincent nodded. "In the mountains. Once got caught in a blizzard driving cattle through a pass. Lost 3 men before we found shelter." Aurora shuddered. "I've only seen it once when I was a child. Mother took me to visit her cousin in the mountains. It was beautiful but frightening too, how something so lovely could turn deadly so quickly." "Like many beautiful things," Vincent said, his eyes on her profile in the firelight. She turned, catching his gaze, and for a moment, something electric passed between them. Then Jackson coughed from his bedroll nearby, breaking the spell. "Get some sleep," the cattle boss grumbled. "Early start tomorrow." 12 days into their journey, disaster struck. While crossing a river swollen from recent rains, Samuel Carter's horse lost its footing. Man and mount were swept downstream toward rapids. Without hesitation, Vincent spurred his horse after them, reaching Samuel just before the rapids. He managed to grab the man's collar, but the current was too strong for his horse to pull them back to shore. "Let me go," Samuel shouted over the roar of water. "You'll both drown." Before Vincent could respond, another rider plunged into the current. Aurora, handling her horse with unexpected skill. Together, they managed to drag Samuel to the far bank, all 3 collapsing in exhaustion once they reached safety. Jackson and Ellie crossed with the cattle further upstream, finding the soaked trio trying to start a fire. "Thought you city girls just painted watercolors and poured tea," Jackson remarked to Aurora, helping build the fire. She wrung water from her shirt. "My mother believed in practical education. We spent summers at my uncle's farm when I was young. He taught me to ride astride when father wasn't looking." That night, as they huddled close to the fire drying their clothes, Samuel approached Aurora. "Thank you for today. Not many men would have done what you did, let alone." "A woman," Aurora finished with a small smile. Samuel looked embarrassed. "I was going to say a person of smaller stature, but yes, you're braver than most men I've ridden with." After Samuel walked away, Vincent moved closer to Aurora. "He's right. That was incredibly brave and foolish." "Was it any more foolish than what you did?" she challenged. "I wasn't raised in a banker's house in town. And I wasn't raised to be helpless despite my father's best efforts." Aurora's voice softened. "I couldn't watch you drown. I just couldn't." Vincent studied her face in the firelight, seeing beyond the dirt and sunburn to the determination underneath. Without thinking, he reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. She caught his hand, holding it against her cheek for a moment before they both remembered where they were and moved apart. The tension between them grew in the days that followed. Small touches, lingering glances, conversations that stretched into the night, all building something neither was ready to name. Aurora found herself watching Vincent as he worked with the cattle or helped prepare meals, admiring his patience and quiet strength. Vincent caught himself making excuses to ride beside her, to teach her new skills, to hear her laugh. 20 days into their journey, they reached a small trading post in the Nevada territory. Jackson decided they would rest for 2 days, restocking supplies and giving the cattle time to graze on the lush grass near the adjacent creek. The post had a small general store and a rudimentary bathhouse, little more than partitioned stalls with metal tubs. but a luxury after weeks on the trail. Aurora nearly wept at the prospect of hot water and soap. "Take your time," Vincent told her, pressing coins into her hand. "I'll keep watch outside." For the first time in weeks, Aurora allowed herself to fully relax, soaking in the hot water until her skin pruned. She washed her hair thoroughly, then dressed in clean clothes purchased from the general store, a simple blue dress that was still more feminine than anything she'd worn since fleeing San Bernardino. When she emerged, she found Vincent waiting, freshly bathed himself and wearing a clean shirt. He stared at her transformation, momentarily speechless. "You look," he began, then cleared his throat. "The dress suits you." Aurora blushed under his gaze. "Thank you. It feels strange after weeks in trousers." They walked together to the small dining room attached to the trading post, where Jackson and the Carter brothers were already enjoying a meal that didn't come from their own cook fire. The cattle boss raised his eyebrows at Aurora's appearance but made no comment. As they ate, the trading post owner approached their table. "Got a telegram came through yesterday. Might interest you folks." He handed Jackson a piece of paper. "Sheriff in some town called San Bernardino asking about a missing girl and the man who took her. Says there's a reward." Jackson took the paper, reading it silently before passing it to Vincent. "Seems your Edmund Griffith is persistent. Rewards up to 500 now." Vincent swore under his breath, showing Aurora the telegram. Her hand trembled as she read the description of herself and the accusation that she'd been abducted by a dangerous drifter with criminal intentions. "We should move on," Vincent said to Jackson. "Tonight, if possible." The cattle boss shook his head. "Cattle need rest." "And leaving suddenly would only confirm suspicions. We stay as planned, but keep your eyes open." That night, Aurora couldn't sleep, her mind racing with worry. She slipped out of the small tent Jackson had procured for her and found Vincent on watch, sitting against a tree at the edge of their camp. "Can't sleep?" he asked as she sat beside him. "I keep thinking about my father, how far he's willing to go." Aurora wrapped her arms around herself. $500 would tempt many men to violence. "Not all men can be bought," Vincent replied. "Jackson, the Carters, they know the truth." "Why are you doing this?" Aurora asked suddenly. "You've risked everything for me, your home, your safety, your reputation." Vincent was quiet for a long moment. "At first it was about doing what's right, about not repeating the mistakes made with my sister." He turned to face her. "But now," she prompted, her heart quickening, "now it's about you." His voice dropped lower. "I've never met anyone like you, Aurora. Your courage, your determination, your kindness, the way you jumped into that river without hesitation, the way you've handled everything thrown at you without complaint." "Vincent, let me finish. I know this isn't proper. I know we've known each other barely a month. But out here, time works differently. I've seen more of your character in these weeks than I might in years of Sunday socials and chaperoned visits." Aurora reached for his hand in the darkness. "I feel the same. When I came to your cabin that night, I was desperate, frightened. I never expected to find someone who would truly see me for the first time in my life." Their faces drew closer, and when their lips met, the kiss was gentle at first, then deepening with weeks of unspoken longing. Aurora felt as though something locked inside her had finally broken free, like a bird taking flight after years in a cage. Vincent's arms encircled her, strong yet tender, and she knew with sudden clarity that she never wanted to leave them. The sound of a throat clearing startled them apart. Lee Carter stood a few yards away, his expression apologetic. "Sorry to interrupt, but there's riders approaching from the south. 6, maybe 7 of them." Vincent helped Aurora to her feet. "Wake Jackson. I'll get the horses ready." 15 minutes later, They were riding north under cover of darkness, leaving the cattle behind with Illy, who would claim they were his if questioned. Jackson led the way, with Samuel, Vincent, and Aurora following single file through dense forest to minimize their trail. "Trading post owner must have sent word about us," Jackson muttered when they paused to rest the horses. "If we push hard, we can reach the mountain pass by noon tomorrow. After that, it's 3 days to the Colorado border." They rode through the night, stopping only when necessary to rest the horses. By dawn, Aurora was swaying in her saddle with exhaustion, but she refused Vincent's suggestion to stop. "I won't be the reason we're caught," she insisted, though her voice was hoarse with fatigue. The mountain pass loomed before them by midday, a narrow trail winding between towering peaks. As they began the ascent, Samuel, who had been riding rearguard, galloped up to them. "Riders behind us, at least 5 moving fast," Jackson swore. "They must have picked up our trail at the creek crossing. We can't outrun them on this terrain." "Go ahead," Vincent decided. "I'll stay behind, slow them down." "No," Aurora protested. "There are too many." "She's right," Jackson said. "One man won't stop them for long." "But there's an old mining cabin about 2 miles up this trail. Defensible position. We make our stand there." The cabin was little more than a stone structure built against the mountainside, with a collapsed wooden roof and a single door. But its stone walls were solid, and the position offered a clear view of the trail below. They led the horses into a small corral behind the cabin and prepared for a siege. Vincent checked his rifle and pistol, handing Aurora his spare revolver. "Remember how I taught you. Aim steady, squeeze, don't pull." She nodded, her face pale but determined. "I won't let them take me back." "I'd rather—" "Don't say it," Vincent interrupted fiercely. "We'll get through this." Their pursuers appeared on the trail below an hour later. Sheriff Bridges, Dr. Morris, and 4 men who looked more like hired guns than lawmen. They halted when Jackson fired a warning shot into the dirt before their horses. "That's close enough," the cattle boss shouted. "This is private property you're trespassing on." Sheriff Bridges rode forward slightly. "We're pursuing fugitives from justice. Vincent O'Connor and Aurora Griffith. Turn them over and the rest of you can ride away." "There's no justice in what you're doing," Vincent called back. "Miss Griffith has committed no crime." Dr. Morris urged his horse beside the sheriff's. "The girl is mentally unsound. She requires medical treatment. Her father is beside himself with worry." Aurora stepped into view, though Vincent tried to pull her back. "My father wants to lock me away for refusing to marry a man 3 times my age. Is that justice, Sheriff?" Bridges at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. "That's a family matter, miss. I'm just doing my job." "Your job is to uphold the law," Vincent responded. "There's no law against a woman choosing her own husband or choosing not to marry at all." One of the hired guns spat tobacco juice. "Enough talking. There's 5 of us and 4 of them. Let's just rush 'em and collect that reward." Bridges raised a hand. "Hold on, Hawkins. Nobody's dying here today if I can help it." He turned back to the cabin. "O'Connor, let the girl come down and talk, just talk. We can sort this out peaceful-like." "He's stalling," Jackson muttered. "Probably has men circling around to come at us from behind." Samuel checked the rear of the cabin. "No sign of movement yet, but he's right. These hills have a dozen game trails a man could use." Vincent looked at Aurora. "What do you want to do?" She squared her shoulders. "I want to make them understand. Bridges seems reasonable even if the others don't." "It's too dangerous," Vincent argued. "I can cover her from here," Jackson offered. "Any man makes a wrong move, he's dead before he knows it." After a tense discussion, they agreed to a parley. Aurora and Vincent would descend halfway down the trail, close enough to talk, far enough to retreat if necessary. Jackson and Samuel would provide covering fire from the cabin. As they walked down the trail, Vincent kept his hand near his pistol and his body slightly in front of Aurora's. When they reached the agreed point, they stopped. "That's far enough," Vincent called. "Say your piece, Sheriff." Bridges dismounted, as did Dr. Morris, though the hired guns remained on their horses, hands near their weapons. "Miss Griffith," Bridges began, "your father is offering a substantial reward for your return. He's worried sick about your well-being." "My father is worried about his reputation and his business arrangements," Aurora replied steadily. "He arranged a marriage for me with Jonathan Pierce without my consent. When I refused, he and my stepmother conspired with Dr. Morris to have me committed to an asylum." Dr. Morris stepped forward, his voice oily with false concern. "Your resistance to a beneficial marriage alliance is symptomatic of your condition, my dear. Women's minds are not equipped for such decisions. The treatments at the Sacramento asylum would correct these delusions." "What treatments?" Vincent demanded. Morris smiled thinly. "Rest cures, hydrotherapy, perhaps electrical stimulation for the more stubborn cases, all quite scientific and humane." "You mean isolation, ice water immersion, and shocks," Aurora countered, her voice shaking with anger. "I've read accounts from women who escaped such places. They're tortured until they become compliant or catatonic." "Exaggerations from hysterical minds," Morris dismissed. Sheriff Bridges looked troubled. "Dr. Morris, are these treatments painful?" "Discomfort is sometimes necessary for healing, Sheriff. But the results justify the methods. Miss Griffith will thank us once she's restored to her right mind." Vincent had heard enough. "Sheriff, you seem like a reasonable man. Would you force your own daughter to marry someone she despised? To be treated until she lost her will to resist?" The sheriff's weathered face reflected his internal conflict. "It's not my place to question a father's authority over his daughter." "It is if that authority becomes tyranny," Aurora said. "I am 23 years old. I have committed no crime. I simply wish to live my life according to my own choices." For a long moment, the only sound was the mountain wind whistling through the pines. Then one of the hired guns grew impatient. "This is getting us nowhere. Let's just take her and collect the reward." He drew his pistol. Everything happened at once. Vincent shoved Aurora behind him as the man fired. Jackson's rifle cracked from the cabin, and the gunman tumbled from his horse. More shots followed, bullets whining past as Vincent and Aurora scrambled back toward the cabin. They made it inside as a full-gun battle erupted. For nearly an hour, shots were exchanged, though it seemed neither side wanted to advance and risk casualties. As the sun began to set, the firing slowed, then stopped. "They're pulling back," Samuel reported, watching through a crack in the wall. "Looks like they're making camp down the trail." "They'll try again in the morning," Jackson predicted grimly, "probably from multiple directions." Vincent checked their ammunition. "We have enough for another fight, but not a prolonged siege." Aurora sat against the wall, her face streaked with dust and sweat. "This is my fault. All of you are risking your lives because of me." Vincent knelt beside her. "This isn't your fault. It's the fault of men who think they can own women like property." Jackson joined them, his expression thoughtful. "There might be another way. The old mine shaft." "Mine shaft?" Vincent asked. "This cabin served miners working a claim about 50 years back. There's a tunnel that runs through the mountain, comes out about 5 miles north. Used to transport ore without having to take the long trail around." Jackson pointed to a dark opening partially hidden by debris in the corner of the cabin. "It's narrow and probably not stable after all these years, but it might be our only option." They spent the next hour clearing the entrance enough to determine the tunnel was passable, though barely. It would be a tight fit for the men, especially Jackson's broad shoulders, and they would have to proceed single file in near total darkness. "What about the horses?" Aurora asked. Samuel shook his head regretfully. "Have to leave them. Take what supplies we can carry." Vincent saw the pain in Aurora's eyes at the thought of abandoning the animals. "We'll release them before we go," he promised. "They'll find their way to water and grazing." As midnight approached, they prepared to depart. Each person carried a small pack with essential supplies. Jackson fashioned crude torches from resinous pine branches, though they would only use them when absolutely necessary to conserve both air and light. Vincent took Aurora aside before they entered the tunnel. "Stay close behind me. If I stop, you stop. If I say run, you run. Understand?" She nodded, then impulsively wrapped her arms around his neck, kissing him fiercely. "Whatever happens, I want you to know these past weeks have been the first time in my life I've felt truly alive." Vincent held her tightly, breathing in her scent. "When we reach Denver, I'm going to court you properly, if you'll have me." "I already have you," she whispered against his lips. The tunnel was worse than they expected, narrow, damp, and occasionally requiring them to crawl through tight passages. After what felt like hours, they reached a fork. "Which way?" Samuel whispered. Jackson hesitated. "Left, I think. The right tunnel probably leads to a secondary shaft." They continued left, moving slowly through the oppressive darkness. Aurora tried not to think about the thousands of tons of rock above them, or how easily the ancient timbers supporting the tunnel could give way. She focused instead on Vincent's steady presence ahead of her, his hand occasionally reaching back to guide her over difficult sections. The first rumble was subtle, a vibration more felt than heard. They froze in place. "Was that?" Samuel began. A second rumble, louder this time, cut him off. Dust and small rocks showered down from the ceiling. "Move!" Jackson shouted. Tunnels collapsing, they abandoned caution, running and crawling forward as the rumbling intensified. Aurora's heart pounded in her chest as she scrambled after Vincent, terror lending her speed she didn't know she possessed. A massive crash sounded behind them as a section of tunnel collapsed. "There," Samuel pointed ahead, where a faint grayness suggested an opening. "I see light." They burst from the tunnel entrance just as a final collapse sent a plume of dust billowing out behind them. Coughing and covered in grime, they collapsed on the ground, gasping for fresh air. Dawn was breaking over the mountains, revealing a forested valley below them. They had emerged on the northern side of the mountain range, well away from their pursuers. "Everyone all right?" Jackson asked, checking each person for injuries. Aside from scrapes, bruises, and frayed nerves, they had survived intact. "What now?" Samuel asked. "We've lost the horses and most of our supplies." Jackson pointed northward. "There's a logging camp about a day's walk from here. My cousin worked there last year. We can get help there, maybe purchase new horses." They rested briefly before starting the long hike down the mountainside. Aurora's legs trembled with exhaustion, but she refused Vincent's offer to carry her pack. By midday, they reached a clear stream where they stopped to drink and wash some of the cave dust from their faces and hands. As Aurora knelt by the water, a reflection caught her eye riders on the ridge they had descended. She alerted the others, and they quickly took cover in the dense underbrush. "How did they find us so quickly?" Vincent whispered as they watched 6 riders scanning the valley below. "Must have discovered the mine entrance after we left," Jackson surmised. "They know we're on this side of the mountain now." They remained hidden until the riders moved on, then continued their journey, keeping to dense forest and ravines to avoid being spotted from higher ground. By nightfall, they were exhausted but had covered significant distance. They made camp in a sheltered hollow, not daring to light a fire despite the mountain chill. Aurora huddled against Vincent for warmth, both of them wrapped in the single blanket he had carried in his pack. "Do you regret helping me?" she asked quietly. Vincent's arms tightened around her. "Not for a moment. Even with guns at our backs and miles of wilderness ahead, even then," he kissed her forehead, "I'd walk through worse to keep you free." The logging camp came into view late the next day, a collection of rough cabins surrounding a clearing filled with cut timber. Jackson was greeted warmly by several men, including his cousin Thomas, who offered them shelter and food. "You folks look like you've been through hell," Thomas remarked as they devoured bowls of venison stew in his cabin. Jackson explained their situation in broad strokes, omitting specifics that might put his cousin at risk. Thomas listened thoughtfully. "The Denver-bound supply wagon leaves tomorrow," he said. "Carries provisions to the railroad construction camp 50 miles east. From there, you can catch a train to Denver." "What about Bridges and his men?" Vincent asked. "Saw riders matching that description heading north earlier today," Thomas confirmed. "Asking questions at farms along the way, but they were watching for 4 people on horseback, not passengers on a supply wagon." Aurora and Vincent exchanged hopeful glances. For the first time since leaving the trading post, escape seemed possible. The next morning, they bid farewell to Jackson and the Carter brothers, who had decided to return to their cattle once the pursuit had moved on. "You're good people," Jackson told them, shaking Vincent's hand. "If you ever need work driving cattle, look me up in Texas." The supply wagon was driven by a taciturn man named Horace, who asked no questions when Thomas introduced the additional passengers. They departed at dawn, Aurora and Vincent sitting in the back of the wagon among sacks of flour and barrels of nails. The journey to the railroad camp took 2 days, bumping along crude roads through increasingly settled country. They passed small homesteads and farms, the wilderness gradually giving way to signs of civilization. "Almost feels strange," Aurora commented, watching a farmer plowing his field. "After weeks in the wild," Vincent nodded. "The frontier's shrinking every year. Another decade and places that felt untouched will have towns and railroads." "Is that why you stayed in San Bernardino?" she asked. "To hold on to something wilder." "Partly," he admitted. "But mostly because it was home. My parents, the ranch, it gave me roots." He glanced at her. "Now I'm not so sure what home means anymore." Aurora's hand found his. "Perhaps home isn't always a place." The railroad construction camp was a hive of activity, hundreds of workers, mostly Chinese immigrants and Irish laborers, laying track eastward while others built temporary structures and moved supplies. The foreman, an imposing man named Sullivan, directed them to the next scheduled train. "Passenger cars full of railway executives heading to Denver," he explained gruffly. "But there's room in the freight car if you don't mind riding with crates." They spent the night in the camp, sharing a small tent provided by Sullivan. The constant noise of the camp hammering, shouting, the clank of metal on metal made sleep difficult, but Aurora found herself too excited to mind. Denver was less than a day away by rail. Freedom was within reach. The train departed at noon the following day, belching black smoke as it built up steam. Aurora and Vincent settled in the freight car, finding comfortable spots among crates of mining equipment. As the train picked up speed, rattling eastward, they allowed themselves to relax for the first time in days. "We made it," Aurora said wonderingly, watching the landscape roll past the partially open door. Vincent pulled her close. "Almost. I won't rest easy until we're settled in Denver, and those men are long gone." They arrived in Denver as sunset painted the sky in brilliant orange and pink. The city sprawled before them, larger and more bustling than Aurora had imagined, with brick buildings, gaslit streets, and people from every walk of life hurrying about their business. Vincent's cousin Martha owned a boarding house 3 blocks from the train station. A practical woman in her 40s with laugh lines around her eyes, she welcomed them with minimal questions, showing them to separate rooms on the 2nd floor. "Vincent's letter reached me last week," she explained to Aurora. "Didn't say much, but enough for me to know you needed a safe harbor." "Any family of Vincent's is family of mine." Aurora blinked back tears. "We're not actually details," Martha waved dismissively. "The way he looks at you tells me everything I need to know. Now get some rest. You look dead on your feet, both of you." For the first time in weeks, Aurora slept in a real bed, clean and comfortable behind a locked door. She woke late the next morning feeling refreshed and strangely light, as though a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Martha provided them with breakfast and advice. "Denver's growing fast. Plenty of opportunity for those willing to work. The university's looking for teaching assistants, and several businesses need clerks who can write a proper letter. I can paint," Aurora offered, "and I speak French and play the piano." Martha nodded approvingly. "The Henderson family on Charter Street is looking for a governess for their daughters. Pay is decent, and they're good people." Vincent seemed hesitant. "We should be careful about appearing in public too soon. Those men could still be searching." "You can't hide forever," Martha said practically. "Best thing is to establish yourselves quickly as respectable Denver citizens. Harder to drag away someone with local connections and employment." Over the next 2 weeks, they followed Martha's advice. Aurora secured a position as a governess for the Henderson girls' twins aged 8 who were bright and eager to learn. Vincent found work at a livery stable, where his knowledge of horses was valued by the owner. In the evenings, they spent time together in Martha's parlor or walking through the city, always alert but increasingly confident they had escaped pursuit. Denver was large enough to provide anonymity, and they were careful to use only their first names in public. Their relationship deepened with each passing day. Without the immediate danger pushing them together, they discovered the quieter joys of courtship conversations about books and ideas, shared dreams for the future, the simple pleasure of holding hands as they walked along the South Platte River at sunset. 1 month after their arrival in Denver, Vincent took Aurora to dinner at a small restaurant near the boarding house. He seemed nervous, fidgeting with his silverware and struggling to maintain conversation. "Is something wrong?" Aurora finally asked. "You've barely touched your food." Vincent took a deep breath. "I've been thinking about what you said on the journey here, about home not always being a place." Aurora's heart quickened. "Yes. I've never felt more at home than I do with you," he continued, his voice gaining strength. "We've known each other under the most extreme circumstances. We've seen each other at our worst and our best, and I love everything I've seen." He reached into his pocket, producing a small gold ring with a modest pearl. "It's not fancy. I've been saving from my wages. But I promise to replace it with something better when I can." Aurora's eyes filled with tears as Vincent slid from his chair to one knee beside the table. "Aurora Griffith, will you make a home with me? Will you be my wife?" "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes." The other diners applauded as Vincent placed the ring on her finger and kissed her, heedless of the public display. Their happiness was interrupted 3 days later, when a familiar face appeared at the livery stable. Sheriff Bridges, alone and looking travel-worn. Vincent froze, his hand instinctively moving toward the knife at his belt. "How did you find us?" Bridges raised his hands to show he was unarmed. "Followed rumors and descriptions. Wasn't hard once I reached Denver. Town's only so big. Are the others with you?" Vincent asked, glancing around for signs of an ambush. No, just me. The sheriff looked uncomfortable. I came to warn you. Dr. Morris and 2 of the hired guns are a day behind me. They're determined to collect that reward. Vincent stared at him suspiciously. Why would you warn us? Bridges removed his hat, turning it in his hands. What Miss Griffith said on that mountain, about being forced to marry, about those asylum treatments, it didn't sit right with me. I've got 3 daughters myself. He looked up, meeting Vincent's gaze directly. After you escaped through that mine shaft, I started asking questions. Found other women in San Bernardino with stories about Dr. Morris, about how he diagnosed female hysteria in wives and daughters who displeased their husbands or fathers. How some never came back from the asylum, and those who did weren't the same. Vincent's grip on his knife relaxed slightly. So you believe Aurora now? I believe she deserves the right to choose her own path, Bridges said. I told Edmund Griffith I was resigning the search. He and the doctor hired those gunmen to continue without me. The sheriff replaced his hat. You've got maybe a day before they reach Denver. I'd be gone by then if I were you. After Bridges departed, Vincent closed the livery early and rushed to the Henderson home, where Aurora was teaching the twins about watercolor painting. Her smile faded when she saw his expression. What's happened? He explained the situation as they walked swiftly back to the boarding house. Aurora listened in silence, her face growing paler with each word. We have to leave Denver, Vincent concluded. Martha knows people in Seattle. We could start fresh there where your father has no influence. Aurora stopped walking, her expression resolute. No, I'm tired of running. Tired of living in fear. Aurora, these men are dangerous, so are we, she countered. We've survived everything they've thrown at us, and now we have friends here, jobs, a future. She took his hands in hers. I won't spend my life looking over my shoulder, wondering if my father's reach extends to the next town or the next territory. What do you suggest? Aurora's eyes flashed with determination. We fight back, legally. That evening they met with Robert Daniels, a lawyer Martha recommended. In his office above the Mercantile, Aurora explained her situation in detail, her father's attempts to force her marriage to Pierce, the plan to commit her to an asylum, and the subsequent pursuit. Daniels listened intently, taking notes. Your case isn't unique, unfortunately. I've represented several women in similar circumstances. The law gives fathers and husbands significant authority over women's lives and property. Is there nothing we can do? Vincent asked. I didn't say that. Daniels smiled slightly. Colorado's territorial laws include provisions for women's property rights that California's don't, and you're both of legal age. If you marry here, Miss Griffith becomes Mrs. O'Connor legally, and her father's claim to control her decisions becomes much weaker. Aurora squeezed Vincent's hand. We were planning to marry anyway. Good, do it tomorrow, I'll be a witness. Daniels shuffled through papers on his desk. There's another matter to consider. Your mother's inheritance, Miss Griffith. You said it remains in your father's control. Until I marry, yes. The principal sum is $5,000, left to me when I turn 25 or upon my marriage, whichever comes first. Daniels nodded thoughtfully. Once you're married, we can file papers demanding the transfer of those funds. It will require notifying the San Bernardino bank, which means your father will learn your whereabouts. But he'll be faced with a legal battle in a different territory if he tries to interfere. The next morning, Aurora and Vincent were married by a judge in his chambers, with Martha and Robert Daniels as witnesses. Aurora wore a simple blue dress, the same one she'd purchased at the trading post, with wildflowers in her hair. Vincent had a new shirt and a nervous smile that melted into pure joy when the judge pronounced them husband and wife. They spent their wedding night in a small hotel near the courthouse, a luxury Martha had insisted on as her gift to them. In the privacy of their room, Aurora and Vincent consummated their marriage with a passion born of deep love and the shared trials that had forged their bond. Afterward, as they lay entwined in the moonlight streaming through the window, Aurora traced the scar on Vincent's shoulder, a reminder of a skirmish with cattle rustlers years before. "You think they'll come for us tomorrow?" she asked softly. Vincent kissed her forehead. "Probably. But we'll face them together as husband and wife." "Husband," Aurora repeated, tasting the word. "It sounds strange and wonderful." "Mrs. O'Connor," Vincent murmured against her hair. "Also strange and wonderful." The confrontation came the following afternoon. Aurora was leaving the Henderson home when she spotted Dr. Morris and two hard-faced men watching from across the street. Her first instinct was to run, but she remembered her resolve. Instead, she walked calmly toward Martha's boarding house, where Vincent would be waiting. The men followed, maintaining distance but making no attempt to hide their presence. When Aurora reached the boarding house, she found Vincent on the porch with Robert Daniels, both men rising as she approached. "They're behind me," she said quietly. "The doctor and two others." Vincent's jaw tightened, but Daniels placed a restraining hand on his arm. "Let them make the first move. Remember the plan." Dr. Morris crossed the street, his companions flanking him. He wore the same smug expression Aurora remembered, though it faltered slightly when he noticed Daniels. "Miss Griffith," Morris began, "your father is most distressed by your continued absence. I've come to escort you home for the treatment you so desperately need." Aurora straightened her spine. "That's Mrs. O'Connor now, Dr. Morris, and I am home." Morris's face darkened. "A hasty marriage to your abductor doesn't change the facts. You're mentally unfit to make such decisions. Your father remains your legal guardian." "Actually," Daniels interjected, "that's incorrect. Mrs. O'Connor is of legal age and sound mind, as certified by Dr. James Wilson of Denver University Medical School." He produced a document. "This assessment, conducted yesterday, found no evidence of hysteria or mental incapacity of any kind." Morris snatched the paper, scanning it with increasing agitation. "This is meaningless. Wilson isn't qualified to. He's the foremost neurologist in the Colorado Territory," Daniels countered smoothly. "His assessment would carry significant weight in any court, as would the testimonials I've gathered from other women who narrowly escaped your treatments in California." One of the hired guns stepped forward, his hand moving toward his gun. "We ain't leaving without the girl. We got promised good money to bring her back." Vincent tensed, but before he could respond, the boarding house door opened. Sheriff Bridges emerged, followed by Denver's chief marshal and two deputies. "I wouldn't if I were you," Bridges advised the gunman. "Threatening a citizen in front of witnesses is a good way to end up in jail or the cemetery." Morris looked frantically between the lawmen. "This woman is mentally unsound. Her father has legal rights. Her father is in California," the marshal interrupted. "This is Denver. Mrs. O'Connor is a married woman residing legally in our city with her husband. Unless you have a warrant issued by a Colorado judge, you have no authority here." Daniels stepped forward, handing Morris another document. "This is a cease and desist order. Any further attempts to interfere with my clients will result in criminal charges and civil action. Additionally, we've filed papers requiring Edmund Griffith to release Mrs. O'Connor's inheritance immediately." Morris's face contorted with rage. "This isn't over. Edmund Griffith has powerful friends, none of whom will risk their reputations once the full story becomes public," Daniels replied calmly. I've prepared a detailed account of your asylum's practices for the San Francisco Chronicle. They're quite interested in publishing it." The color drained from Morris's face. For a long moment, he stood speechless, then crumpled the papers in his fist and stormed away. The hired guns, seeing their payday vanishing, followed reluctantly. Aurora sagged against Vincent, the tension draining from her body. "Is it really over?" "Legally, yes," Daniels confirmed. "They have no grounds to force your return. And once your inheritance is secured, you'll have the financial means to build your life here." 3 months later, Aurora and Vincent moved into a small house on the outskirts of Denver. Her inheritance, released after Daniels's aggressive legal action, provided them with security and options they hadn't dared dream of on their flight from San Bernardino. Aurora continued teaching the Henderson girls, but also began giving piano lessons to other children in their neighborhood. Vincent, with his experience and Aurora's capital, purchased partnership in the livery stable where he worked, expanding it to include a horse breeding operation. On a crisp autumn evening, they sat on their porch swing, watching the sunset paint the distant Rocky Mountains in gold and crimson. Aurora rested her head on Vincent's shoulder, her hand absently stroking her slightly rounded belly, their first child due in spring. "Any regrets?" Vincent asked, his arm tightening around her. Aurora shook her head. "Not one, though I do wonder about my father sometimes. If he ever understood what he almost did. Some men never see past their own authority to the damage it causes," Vincent replied. "But we broke that cycle. Our children will grow up knowing their choices matter." "Children," Aurora teased. Already planning more, Vincent kissed her softly. "At least 3, maybe 4. A whole houseful of strong-minded Griffith O'Connors to change the world." Aurora laughed, the sound carrying across their small garden where wildflowers still bloomed despite the approaching winter. "I love you, Vincent O'Connor. Thank you for helping me escape my cage." "I love you too, Aurora O'Connor." His hand joined hers over their growing child. "But you were never meant for a cage. All I did was open the door. You were always meant to fly." As darkness settled over Denver, they remained on the porch, talking of their plans and dreams. The journey that had brought them together, fraught with danger and desperation, had forged a bond stronger than any conventional courtship could have created. What began as an escape had become a love story neither of them had imagined possible in those first desperate moments in Vincent's cabin back in San Bernardino. The years that followed brought 3 children, 2 boys and a girl, a thriving business, and deep roots in the growing city of Denver. Aurora never returned to San Bernardino, though she eventually received a letter from her father, aging and ill, seeking reconciliation. The meeting was brief and awkward, but provided closure she hadn't realized she needed. Dr. Morris's asylum practices were eventually exposed in a series of newspaper articles, leading to reforms in California's mental health laws. Aurora contributed anonymously to the effort, her detailed account of her near commitment helping other women avoid similar fates. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Vincent took Aurora back to the mountain pass where they had made their stand against their pursuers. The old mining cabin was little more than stone ruins now, but the view of the valley remained spectacular. Was I really worth all this? Aurora asked as they stood hand in hand, looking out over the landscape that had witnessed their desperate flight. Vincent turned to her, his face lined with the years but his eyes still holding the same devotion they had when he first helped her escape. "Every moment, every mile, every struggle. I'd do it all again for one day with you, Aurora." "So would I," she whispered, resting her head against his chest, listening to the steady heartbeat that had become the rhythm of her life. "So would I."